All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another ShareWise webinar. My name is Harry McCaskill, one of the senior advisors and a head of desk here at ShareWise. Very, very pleased to welcome the executive chairman, Greg, today, and the chief operations officer, Mary Ann of Emyria, and EMD is the ticker code on ASX. So very, very happy to have them on board. Very pleased to be able to present this webinar today, and hopefully everyone's having a good day so far. I won't take the floor too much from you guys. I'll let you do most of the talking, but I do know very, very exciting things happening there at Emyria, and there's a few key topics that can be discussed today. And I'll just do a little bit of a brief right now, just how it will sort of work and how the webinars work here at ShareWise. So it is recorded, so if anyone does need to rush off, you'll have the ability to rewatch that. That's fine, but there is going to be a bit of a presentation at the start by both Greg and Marianne, which should be really, really good. And then at the end, there'll be a little bit more of a Q&A. So throughout the presentation, if anyone has any questions, make sure you drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A section. I'll make sure to touch on as many as I can at the end. And I might jump in throughout and make it a little bit more, a little bit more personal throughout the presentation, ask a few questions, but it should be really, really good. And guys, I really appreciate your time. I know you're both very, very busy, and it's great to have you on board and see what you guys have got.
Great, thanks, Harry.
Great, thanks, Harry.
Good to be here.
I can share. I can see your screen. And then, like I said, just go through the slides. I'll jump in, and obviously, like I said, there's a lot of key topics to discuss. Your growth strategy, and the addressing the outcomes. There was a really, really good announcement this morning. I know many people have probably got a few questions about that. So take it away. Give yourselves a little bit of an introduction for those who might not know, and we'll touch base at the end.
Great. Well, I'll start us off. Thanks, Harry, and hopefully everyone can hear me fine. Greg Hutchinson's my name. I'm the executive chairman, as Harry said, of Emyria. Have been in this role since the beginning of this year, having been in healthcare for the last 35 years, rolling out, managing, building healthcare clinics, particularly in the medical space over the course of that time and at scale. It's a really exciting time in the psychedelic space at the moment. We know that AbbVie, for example, has just made a big announcement about an acquisition, a $1.2 billion US acquisition of a psychedelic drug in the US that's in, I think, Marianne's second stage of clinical trials. And of course, the Trump administration is very supportive, vocally supportive of psychedelics, particularly for the veterans population in the US. But here at Emyria, we have a distinct advantage because we are actually treating people with significant mental health issues in a real-world situation. And if we look at Emyria at a glance, this has come about because in 2023, as most of you would be aware, the TGA rescheduled 2 promising mental health treatments. They rescheduled both MDMA and psilocybin from Schedule 9, so that's illicit drugs, to Schedule 8 controlled substances. And that's meant that we have been able to treat, since the end of 2023, patients in a real-world clinical setting for both PTSD and treatment-resistant depression. Now, the first 30 people that came through our program had to fund the very complex and very complicated treatment in its entirety, and they had to fund it to the tune of around $30,000. But we now know that we've got private health insurance funding, as many of you would be aware, for both treatment of PTSD and treatment-resistant depression, off the back of some incredibly durable and sustained patient outcomes. You would also be aware that we've been treating in Perth since the end of 2023, but have recently announced that we are rolling out a new clinic in Brisbane, which will become operational by the end of this calendar year. And we start to see revenues coming in from private health insurance funding that commenced in Q3 this calendar year. Just a quick corporate overview. Many of you would be aware that in June of this year, we conducted a very successful and oversubscribed capital raise at 2.4 cents. We've had some significant appreciation in the share price since that time, which has been very pleasing. But perhaps even more pleasing has been the volumes that have increased over the course of particularly the last month and a half or so. And I think we're at record levels in terms of trading on a day-to-day basis. I'm obviously very interested in this space to the extent that I've invested nearly $1.5 million in the stock and am the single largest shareholder as a consequence. Anything else you want to add to that, Mary?
No, that's good.
And why wouldn't you be interested in this space? I mean, there is a significant unmet need in treatment of mental health in Australia and indeed around the world. And if we look at the prevalence of cancer, in other words, the number of people who are suffering with cancer at any one time in the community at this point, it's basically plateaued over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, thanks to new treatment innovations, new drugs, new technology. The reality is that we haven't seen a single new treatment for depression and anxiety in the entirety of that time. And we know anecdotally, at least, that since COVID, that problem has increased. But it isn't just individuals, their families, friends, and workmates that are suffering. This is causing a significant commercial and economic impost. And if we look, for example, at private health insurers, Medibank Private last year spent $219 million on mental health admissions alone. The DVA is spending in the vicinity of $300 million a year on veterans' mental health. And other insurers, life insurers, are spending a significant amount of money on disability claims. In other words, people who aren't able to return to work as a consequence of their mental health issues. So, Marianne, there is a significant problem that needed and is still needing to be addressed. I might let you talk to some of the detail in terms of how this has all come about.
Yep. Thanks, Greg. Rennie, COO of Emyria, background in commercial and operational through a couple of different industries, and spent the last 8 years in healthcare looking to combine my passion for healthcare and the desire to get commercial returns for businesses and their shareholders. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit more detail of what we're doing here at Emyria. It's a really exciting time for us, as Greg said. We're just setting up our first East Coast clinic, and I've just flown back from Brisbane, where we've had our first training course of 6 psychiatrists and around 22 therapists, which has been absolutely excellent. So we've gone through a significant recruitment drive to get that clinic operational, or in the steps of getting it operational. So as Greg mentioned, we think we're in a bit of a Stephen Bradbury moment here, really, because Australia doesn't typically take the lead in these regulation changes. But back in 2023, they became the first jurisdiction globally to reschedule these 2 very promising treatments. So MDMA for psychedelic for PTSD, the treatment of PTSD, and psilocybin for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression. Now, this is highly regulated and only allowable through the authorised prescriber scheme, and has to be prescribed by an authorised psychiatrist. So a huge amount of regulation that encompasses these treatments. But it's worth noting that Australia is still the only jurisdiction globally that has done this rescheduling. So it really positions us uniquely to become a global leader in the delivery of these treatments. Now, this regulation reschedule, it wasn't taken lightly. It was off the back of some significant clinical trial data that has been coming out of the US. So the results were so compelling that the TGA moved to allow these treatments in Australia. Just to give you an idea of the domestic total addressable market here, so we're looking at around 1.5 million adult Australians who suffer from PTSD. Now, if we try and break that down to what our serviceable addressable market might be, it's approximately 600,000. And we do that by looking at who's treatment resistant and then who's medically suitable. And then if we break it down even further, because that is still a huge number of individuals, we're looking at people who are who have hospital cover, so current hospital cover, or who are vets, or who have workers' compensation. And the reason we've done it this way is that it is effectively third-party funding. So these individuals wouldn't need to be funding it themselves. Because as you can see, the treatment is around $30,000 to $33,000 for PTSD. So it's a really significant cost to the individual. So if you do the maths on those numbers, you get some pretty staggering revenues. And now this is exactly the same slide, but for treatment-resistant depression in particular. So again, some very significant early target markets to address, ones that would take many years to actually treat. Now, the reason the treatment cost is slightly lower at $22,000 is because you do two treatment cycles, dosing cycles, so coming in for the medication twice, whereas for PTSD, you do it 3 times. So that's where the price difference comes from. But otherwise, the protocol and how we do these treatments are very, very similar. Now, this slide is just to illustrate how difficult this treatment is to actually deliver. So we've really worked on delivering a moat, and developing a moat for our business. So you need to have your fit for purpose facilities, which we have in place. We have 2 clinics here in Perth and establishing one in Brisbane. They have some tech included, and each of our rooms look very similar. So it's easy to understand that it's an Emyria clinic. But what you need to do is have a proven clinical model. Now, this is highly regulated. It needs to have ethics endorsement. It's a significant amount of work that goes into this. It then needs to be approved by the TGA. In addition to that, you need to establish psychiatrists who you then seek approval for. Again, quite a regulated and extensive process. For them to receive this approval, they need to have supervision. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but if they don't get supervision, they can't actually receive this approval. Supervision is something that we can provide in the training course as well to get them up and running. You need skilled therapists. Again, these are people like clin psychs, psychologists, mental health nurses, counsellors. They need to have a trauma-focused background and, again, have in-house training, which we offer, which we provide. And then you need to make sure you have secure drug supply so that you have a steady stream of that. It has been quite limited in the past, but it's fabulous to see that local suppliers are now manufacturing the products, so the surety is improving. And then really the biggest piece or the next step is having that third-party funding. And what that means is that it becomes accessible to the everyday Australian. You're not only delivering this to people who can afford it themselves. And having that third-party funding allows you to be able to grow and provide this treatment to the individuals. So you would have seen that we've obviously had Medibank, who's funding our programs. This is really exciting to see. We're the first provider that they have gone into an agreement with. And then we'll talk later in the presentation around the other areas. DVA has publicly said that they'll fund their vets, which is good news because they have a significant number of individuals with PTSD in particular. Anything else to add to that, other than the fact that it is quite difficult to actually deliver this treatment? All right, we get asked this question a lot. What does it actually look like? What does your treatment look like? So an individual's referred in, we screen them, and we determine whether they are eligible or not. They are then prepared through some therapist sessions and meetings with the psychiatrist. They then come in for our active treatment protocol. So we break that down by dosing cycles. For PTSD, it's 3 dosing cycles, and for treatment-resistant depression, it's 2 dosing cycles. You spend a full day with medication and therapy and some follow-up sessions. And this treatment protocol typically spans 6 to 8 weeks. And then there's a follow-up period of a few touch points over the next 12 months. Really important that we're checking in, but also part of Emyria's fabric is actually collecting data to show these are evidence-based programs and the outcomes that we're seeing and monitoring closely. And then we say there that each dosing cycle is $10,000 per patient. Now, this slide just speaks to one case study in particular. We have a number of these, but gives you an idea of what we're seeing. So this is Kate. Kate has been known to us for 5 years. She has complex PTSD from workplace traumas as a paramedic. No matter what Kate tried in terms of interventions to get better, she progressively got worse over the 5 years. She then commenced MDMA-assisted therapy treatment. She had a significant or a complete drop in her PTSD symptom scores. And in that grey area indicates you don't actually have PTSD anymore. So you can see she's right down the bottom of that and maintained those results and is still maintaining those results 6 months and further post her treatment. Kate was in a permanent disability claim. She wasn't working at the time and she never expected to be able to go back to work. She is now back at work as a part-time nurse and part-time paramedic. So an absolutely huge turnaround from where she was before the treatment. As I said, one case study, but we have many examples of where this treatment has been effective for our patients, which is very promising. Now, speaking of this workplace trauma and going back to work, these are more broadly results that we've seen amongst the 10 patients that we've treated with workplace PTSD. So at the start of the treatment, none of them were working, and 6 months post-treatment, 100% have gone back to gainful employment, some in their original employments, so firefighting, etc., and others who have gone into alternative employment. But these are really promising statistics for people who didn't think they would be able to re-enter the workforce, and we continue to monitor these. Final data slide is just to show, as I mentioned at the beginning, Australia changed the regulations based on clinical trials that have come out of the US. And so what we can see here is that our data and outcomes are very closely mirroring the results of the clinical trials data, which is fabulous. But what you can see now is we have extended evidence to show that at the 6 month mark, we still see sustained and durable improvements for these individuals. And we continue to monitor that past the 6 month mark. Now, 60% of patients no longer meet the criteria for a PTSD diagnosis, and 80% of our patients have a clinically significant improvement. These are staggering statistics that we're really proud of, and as I say, we continue to gather evidence as we see our patients go through the program. And at this point, we have had 0% dropout. So again, very promising that people are engaged with the program. In conventional treatments, you often see people drop out of the program because they are extended or they're not seeing improvement at the pace that they're hoping for. All right, so the Medibank agreement, we announced that in June that Medibank was funding our PTSD program in Perth. That was a real catalyst for us in terms of seeing throughput coming through our clinics, which was great, and actually a world first in terms of a private health funder funding these psychedelics. Since then, we came out a couple of weeks ago to announce that Medibank had extended that agreement to also cover treatment-resistant depression in Perth. And then this morning, we have announced that we've now gone into an agreement with them to cover the treatments, both treatment programs at our clinic in Brisbane. So this is really fabulous news for us. The interesting thing to note about the Medibank agreement is that it needs to take place in a hospital setting, and that will Greg will speak to more of our national rollout plans further down the track. Now, great to see that we've had this excellent catalyst with third-party funding, but it's worth noting that the DVA, so they're supporting the veterans, they have said publicly that they're going to fund psychedelic-assisted therapies for their members. And we're waiting on them to advise as to how that's going to take place and when that's going to take place. But again, really promising to see. And then we're also seeing case-by-case funding approvals coming through from workers' compensation and other funders. So we're in discussions with these different providers to ensure that we're getting third-party funding for those individuals. So this is an evolving space that we're working through.
Thanks, Marianne. So in terms of our national rollout, we have already announced, we've got the clinics running in Perth already, and have announced that we will, before the end of this calendar year, start operating from our Brisbane clinic. Medibank, the Medibank agreement, as Marianne said, mandates that we have to perform these services from within a private hospital, and that's actually done us a very big favour in terms of being able to roll out sites once we have agreements with other private hospital operators in a relatively capital-light framework. We don't have to create the infrastructure because it's already there. We're essentially taking up bed space that the hospitals already have. So for us, the main thrust of our entry into new markets is acquisition and training of new talent. And you can see here that we're aiming to roll out clinics across the eastern seaboard in major capital cities, but indeed up in places like Darwin and Townsville, where there are significant veterans populations. In terms of our modelling, when we first talked, and this is our metrics and how we're measuring our growth strategy, when we first announced the initial agreement with Medibank in Perth, we had 2 beds operating 2 days per week. So for us, that means that we have 4 dosing day capacity per week. Now, we've been overwhelmed, as you might be aware, with demand, and that's meant that we've extended the number of days per week that we're operating at Perth Clinic to 5 days, which gives us capacity for 10 dosing days per week. Now, Perth Clinic have been kind enough, based on the demand that's there, to look at refurbishing their facility to accommodate 4 beds per week, 4 beds per day, 5 days a week, which will give us 20 dosing day capacity in Perth. And with the eventuation of the Aviv Clinic in Brisbane and the additional 3 beds that we have there, times 5 days per week, by the end of this calendar year, we expect to be or have a capacity of 35 dosing days per week, bearing in mind that each dosing day represents revenue of in the order of $10,000. And over the course of next calendar year, our aim is to roll out more beds across the country, as I said, in terms of our national rollout. So in terms of milestones that have been achieved, but milestones that we're looking to achieve, we have already announced now that we have funded, or that Medibank has expanded their funding to include treatment-resistant depression. And we're in the process of growing our capacity nationally via new site partners. The next thing that we really want to see, as we've discussed, is an expansion of funders to Department of Veterans Affairs and other workers' compensation insurers to expand funding across a broader spectrum of the population. Ultimately, though, we then want to optimise utilisation. So at the moment, our strategy is to grow as many beds as we can across the country so that we increase the number of dosing days that we have in terms of capacity, and then look to utilise those beds or maximise utilisation of those beds ultimately. So I guess what strikes us about Emyria at this point in time is that we have significant first mover advantage. We're the only listed entity in this space, and it is difficult for competitors to emulate what we are doing, particularly at scale, and particularly to overcome the high barriers to entry that exist and that Marianne discussed earlier. The other thing that's very evident to us is that we are already seeing revenue coming through as a consequence of the Medibank deal, and that we have and that we are already executing on our growth potential. So, Harry, I guess that provides a little bit of a snapshot as to where Emyria is at the moment and how we're placed. It's, as you started off by saying, it's an incredibly exciting time for us. We've just started this journey. There's a long way to go, but already we're starting to kick some goals.
Yeah, it is. As you touched on, it's very, very exciting. There's a lot happening. It seems like there's a lot of catalysts potential really big moves, which is, you guys are well positioned. And as you said, it is very, very hard to get started, and it creates a little bit of a niche because the competition is most likely so far behind. But when it comes to the competition in the industry, obviously, like you said, you're the only guys listed on the ASX. Are you guys protected when it comes to psychiatrists getting training and approval? Obviously, you got to spend money getting them trained and approved with you guys, but is there any protection for them to just leave and potentially go to another competitor? How do you guys protect yourself there?
That's a good question, Harry. What we find is, at the moment, as said, we're kind of looking at this as from a national. Sorry. I know that's all right.
Yeah, that's sweet.
So yes, are we protected? Look, we offer the full service so that the psychiatrists can do what they do best. So
Yep.
we provide the application for the authorised prescriber status, and we get them up and running, and they're contracted to us. So that's where we provide them the right environment to make it as easy as possible for them to be able to do what they do best and deliver the treatments.
Yeah, beautiful. And just on the same topic of psychiatrists and therapists, is it hard to get them interested in something like this, because it is very new and it is something that they're probably not too familiar with? How's the interest, and how are you finding that?
I would say it's fair to say that, look, it's not for all psychiatrists. Not all of them want to do it, but we've had great interest. People are really wanting to, they have their books are full. They've got many patients that they've been treating for many years with these conditions, and they're excited by the innovation and the potential to see better outcomes for the patients that they have. So I would say it hasn't been difficult at all. There's quite a lot of interest.
Yeah, I guess that, in psychiatrists and therapists, they probably already deal with these sort of things, and it's probably just going to make their job a little bit easier. And if they can sign a contract with you guys, and I guess it's a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more secure for them, I imagine it's a win-win-win.
Very difficult to do it as an individual psychiatrist, Harry. I think that you need an infrastructure around you, not just for the operational phase of it, but in terms of getting a psychiatrist up to speed, through the authorised prescriber process, which is onerous. And then once they're attuned to our protocols, it's difficult for them to shift elsewhere.
Of course. And a big congratulations with expanding that Medicare, the Medibank arrangement. That is very exciting for you guys. There's a question coming through on that topic from one of the listeners. With that new arrangement and the expansion on that, does that prevent you guys working with other private health insurers? And if not, when are you aiming to add more players?
In fact, we're hoping that other private health insurers come on board quickly. I mean, Medibank's been fantastic in terms of their support, but we do anticipate we don't have an exclusive deal, and they don't have exclusivity with us. But we're obviously the first ones and out in front of the rest of the pack here.
Yeah.
So are they. But we do want to see more private health insurers come on board and start supporting, in addition to DBA and workers' compensation insurers.
Yeah,
and it's fair to say, Harry, private health insurers, of course, they want to see improved outcomes for their patients, but they also want to see that the health economics make sense for them. So they, as Greg mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, just Medibank alone spent $219 million in 1 year for mental health admissions into a hospital.
Wow.
So that's why they want to see that the health economics evidence that this is actually going to save money in the long term, because the hope is that then these individuals aren't coming back in for regular admissions, which is an extremely costly exercise for these people.
For sure. So that's just going to benefit them as well. Do you, when it comes to obviously the topic we just spoke about, obviously Medibank, they're first, and hopefully that starts that little trickle domino effect. Not everyone really wants to be first, and everyone wants to be next. So hopefully that starts to happen for you guys. And with the funding for obviously the projects and expansion and everything else in between, how difficult are you guys finding it, and the risk involved of trying to expand to someone like Melbourne and Sydney to get offices or clinics in those big cities where you're probably going to see more demand?
Is it the risks we see, or is that the question?
I guess what's the time frame or timeline on getting clinics opened up in bigger cities like Melbourne and Sydney?
I can probably take that one. So at the moment, what we've done is obviously foster our first Eastern Seaboard clinic, and it just happens to be in Brisbane, which was somewhat probably opportunistic based on Aviv being the first to do a deal with us.
Yep.
We are in discussions with other providers. As I said earlier, the biggest hurdle, to be absolutely frank, is in acquiring new talent. So new psychiatrists and new therapists
Yep.
to be able to administer the treatment in each new location that we go to.
Yep.
And as we said earlier, we've had no end of interest right around the country from psychiatrists and therapists. So if that's our biggest hurdle, I think that it's one that we will be able to overcome relatively quickly.
Well, that's promising, and obviously that's the growth strategy, right? Getting more beds available and more clinics available, and then obviously the psychiatrists and therapists as well. Just in regards to, I guess, a little bit more about the process and treating patients and everything in that regard with the drugs. But why are these treatments so hard to deliver? And I think what puts you ahead of anyone else in the industry, would you say?
I would say the actual treatment, the patient coming in and having their treatment, it's not the difficult bit. It's all of the background coordination in a highly regulated environment to allow that to happen is the difficult bit. As you can appreciate, this is new for Australia with a highly scheduled product. So they're wanting to make sure that it's being done in an appropriate way. And so there's many different hurdles and pieces of information and approvals that need to be acquired. And to actually do all of that requires a collection of skill sets, which we're very fortunate to have as a company. As Greg mentioned, typically psychiatrists operate individually, and so they don't have all of that infrastructure to help support this.
And even getting the drug on site isn't easy.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, you've got to have special drug safes and processes in place to actually allow that to occur.
That was actually my next question. Where do you guys where do you source the drug supply?
Yeah, so initially it was coming from Canada, and now there are more manufacturers that are manufacturing. There's a business case now to be manufacturing in Australia, so which is good because then you're not dependent on one supplier. There are multiple suppliers who have now entered this.
Beautiful, and that lowers costs inherently as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, and improves security around it.
Perfect. That's exactly what patients are probably looking for as well, right? So some level of security. It's obviously something that they're putting a lot of trust in, and that probably puts them a little bit more peace of mind as well, right?
Yeah, and it's fair to say that people have typically heard about these drugs in more of a party environment. But when you need to meet the regulation and requirements, it's a significant effort they need to be GMP grade products that are manufactured in a very particular way in certain settings. So again, highly regulated.
Yeah, of course. Now with the scope of the scalability of the project and I guess what you're doing there. Is there anything you can touch base on regarding any sort of guidance with regards to revenues or anything for the financial year? There's a few questions coming through about that. Is there anything you can touch on regarding that?
Well, I think our strategy is fairly clear at the moment in terms of we want to establish as many beds as we can so that we have as many dosing days going around the country as possible in the first instance. It's a little bit of a crude way to put it, but we're in a little bit of a land grab at the moment to make sure that we are the first in as many jurisdictions as possible to be rolling out this treatment.
Yeah.
Once we have beds in place and we have patients in place, then we will look to maximise utilisation of those beds. And I think at that point we'll be better positioned to be able to provide more formal guidance in terms of revenue and profitability.
Yeah, of course. And do you think the hospitals are more inclined to work with yourselves more so than your competitors? And like you said, it's a little bit of a land grab at the moment, so you can help as many people as possible. But why do you think they're interested in partnering with you more so than anyone else out there? What puts you out of the game? Is it the advancement in the drug and the processes you've got in place, or what do you think sets you guys apart?
Yeah, look, Harry, we were one of the first to receive authorised prescriber status in Australia. So, and we have done, to our understanding, most likely the most number of treatments. So the experience is certainly there that we've gathered over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
We're very evidence based in our delivery as well. So we're used to the clinical trial environment. We collect a significant amount of data, which is very comforting for people. I would also say, if you look at the competitor landscape, there's no other company that's structured like us or at our size. So we're fortunate that we have the infrastructure and team to actually move on this as well. Yeah. And so I would say that's what puts us apart and sets us up.
I think we've got a very strong corporate and clinical governance framework in place, and I think that's reassuring from a hospital perspective, because to your point earlier, this is a very new treatment, and they want to ensure that the clinical governance as well as the corporate governance is of the most elite quality.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think that again, they're just looking for something that they can see evidence based on, and you've got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And just in relation to expansion and profitability in the future, when do you guys anticipate the company to get to break even? What's the expectations there?
So it is a question that we're asked a lot, and our modelling. We do have modelling that demonstrates when we think we'll get to a break-even point. It's not something that we've disclosed to the market as yet. But as I said earlier, our main thrust at the moment is not so much around getting to break-even. It's about getting revenue up as high as we can by expanding our network as quickly as possible around the country. After that, we will look to ensure that our utilisation is maximised, at which point we'll start to hit profitability.
Yeah, beautiful. And just a couple more questions that have come through. I'll touch on one. I know obviously not everyone has all day, every day to sit here and ask questions all day, but there's one come through. Is there scope to do anything and business with any US patients or potential companies in the future? Is that something you guys are focused on, or is it really you want to knuckle down, get Australia sorted, and then maybe down the track obviously look into the US or internationally? What's the thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, if to your first question around US patients, obviously our regulation allows these treatments. We don't talk about medical tourism because of the size of the domestic market, but we have had some international patients that have come over and sourced treatment from us and our programs already. So, yeah, to your point, yes, firstly, it's to address the domestic market. And then it's going to be an interesting situation to see how regulation unfolds in different countries as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, guys, like I said, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad we've had you on board. I think we've touched base on a lot of questions that have come through. There was a few overlapping ones, so I didn't want to repeat myself. But one thing I like to ask everyone that I host the webinar for before we wrap things up, if there was one thing that a new or a current investor should know about EMD, why they should continue to be a shareholder or should become a shareholder of EMD, what do you think that would be as that sort of one thing that is in your heart the reason why you've got so much sort of belief in the company? We'll get
to narrow it down to one, Harry.
We'll get one from Greg and one from Marianne. I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I think what is most heartening is hearing the stories from our patients. People who have been suicidal and have managed to overcome incredible adversity as a consequence of going through our treatment protocol, sometimes only after one treatment, seeing light that they haven't seen in years. So from my perspective, that's probably the most heartening thing. And I know that our therapists and indeed our psychiatrists feel heartened as well. So that is very much at the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that if we can replicate that around the country, then we're going to make a big difference to a great many Australians and indeed potentially international people.
I couldn't agree more. And Marianne?
Yeah, I would say so I completely agree with Greg there, and the second thought is also that we're at the start of our journey. So for Emyria, this is really the start. This is the start of the industry. You know, there's a lot of growth potential here, and a lot of potential ahead of us. So I think that's another reason.
Love that. It's all the grunt work's been done, and hopefully the dominoes start to fall, huh?
Yeah.
Well, lovely guys. I do appreciate your time, and everyone, thank you for watching. Has been another ShareWise webinar, and everyone have a lovely, lovely afternoon. Again, it is recorded, so reach out to ShareWise or reach out to the team over there at Emyria, and I'm sure they'll be in touch. But if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to take some. So jump on the ShareWise website. You can fill out a speak to an advisor form. So, Greg, Marianne, really appreciate your time, and you guys have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks,
Appreciate you
Bye.
facilitating.
Beautiful.
Cheers.